War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 84, the Battle of New Orleans. In the absence of any feedback, I'm going to continue with the historical battle and try to do more of an American-focused. Ones you've probably heard about, no magic secret ones. Maybe we'll do those later, the forgotten battles. But right now we'll do the famous ones, and hopefully you learned something, and if nothing else, you'll know what some famous battles are. So to understand the Battle of New Orleans, it is of course necessary to contextualize the War of 1812 and British interest in the lower Mississippi Valley. The war stemmed from several interconnected tensions. The British impressment of American sailors, otherwise known as slavery, interference with American shipping via the Orders in Council, British support for the Native American insurrections against U.S. westward expansion, and lingering resentment from the American Revolution. The war was unpopular in some regions of the United States, particularly New England, but supported in the South and West, where many citizens viewed it as a means of expanding territory and asserting national sovereignty. For Britain, the war was initially a peripheral conflict, while the Napoleonic Wars consumed most military resources. Only after Napoleon's abdication in April of 1814 could Britain shift additional troops and naval assets to North America. British planners saw an opportunity to pressure the United States into concessions, potentially including greater control over border regions or demilitarization of frontier areas. New Orleans, as the key port controlling the mouth of the Mississippi River, held indispensable economic importance. It served as the export point for goods from the American interior, including agricultural production from the newly settled Western territories. Capturing New Orleans would have provided Britain with significant leverage at the negotiating table, or, at a minimum, allowed disruption of American commerce. The city also had symbolic weight. Its loss would have weakened American morale and legitimacy. The American defense of the southern region fell upon Major General Andrew Jackson, a relatively new national figure whose military reputation had grown through campaigns against Creek forces earlier in the war. The Creek War culminated in the Treaty of Fort, wait for it, Jackson, which expanded American control in the southeast but also created controversy regarding Jackson's harsh terms. Regardless, Jackson's success led to his appointment to command U.S. forces defending the Gulf Coast. Upon arriving in New Orleans in December of 1814, Jackson confronted several challenges: limited number of regular troops, poor existing fortifications, political divisions within the city, and a diverse population composed of Anglos, French Creoles, free-colored, enslaved blacks, and foreign-born residents. Many residents resented aspects of American rule and still viewed themselves culturally either French or Spanish. Despite these obstacles, Jackson worked efficiently to mobilize available resources. He declared martial law, a controversial action at any time, and ordered the reinforcement of Fort St. Philip below the city. He organized a defensive line along the Rodriguez Canal, a shallow ditch on the Chalmette plantation several miles downriver from New Orleans. This location offered a relatively narrow field of approach, bounded by the Mississippi River on one side and swampy woods on the other, limiting the maneuverability of attacking forces. American defenders consisted of a mix of regular U.S. Army, local militia, Kentucky and Tennessee volunteers, Choctaw allies, free black militia units, and Jean Lafitte's Baratarian privateers, who provided artillery experience. Their training, equipment, and experience varied greatly. Many militia members lacked proper uniforms, and Kentucky troops had a shortage of firearms. Nonetheless, Jackson's leadership and natural strength at a defensive position helped compensate for these limitations. The British Expeditionary Force sent to capture New Orleans was commanded by Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, an experienced officer who had served with distinction in the Peninsular War alongside the Duke of Wellington. The force numbered approximately 7,500 to 8,000 men, infantry, Marines, artillery units, and West Indian troops. They sailed across the Gulf of Mexico and approached the Delta region via Lake Borgne. Before they could land, British forces needed to neutralize American naval resistance in the area. On December 14th, a British flotilla overwhelmed American gunboats at the Battle of Lake Borgne. This action allowed the British to deploy troops on Louisiana's terrain, but the approach route was difficult. The Redcoats had to traverse bayous, waterways, marshlands, dragging equipment through mud and swarms of insects. Supply lines became extended, vulnerable, and the climate was far different from the European theaters where most British troops had previously served. Strategically, the British anticipated that capturing New Orleans would force the United States to negotiate from a position of weakness. Their initial plan, involving advancing upriver, defeating American forces, and taking control of the city, British officers believed that their professional army could easily overwhelm the mixed American defensive force. Early skirmishes, however, revealed that the Americans were more organized than expected, and the terrain favored the defenders. On December 23rd, American forces launched a nighttime attack on the British encampment near Villers Plantation. This encounter was inconclusive, but significant. Though tactically a draw, the surprise assault unsettled the British and delayed their advance, giving Jackson more time to strengthen his fortifications. This would be a good example of a spoiling attack. The engagement also demonstrated to British officers that American troops, particularly those under Jackson's personal command, were capable of bold action. Additional skirmishes followed, artillery duels and attempts by both to improve their positions. The British sought to bring forward heavier guns from the fleet, but the marshy terrain complicated transportation. The Americans expanded their earthworks along the Rodriguez Canal, constructing breastworks of earth logs and cotton bales. Contrary to popular mythology, cotton bales were not widely used as primary defensive material, as they tended to ignite when hit by artillery fire. However, some bales did appear in certain sections of the line and were reinforced by dirt and timber. By early January, the British had established batteries opposite the American line, hoping to pierce the defenses with sustained bombardment. On January 1st, Happy New Year, a major artillery exchange occurred. Although the British guns inflicted some damage, American artillery, manned in part by the Barratarian gunners, proved highly effective, eventually silencing several British positions. This outcome further strengthened American confidence while certainly frustrating the British planners. The geography of the Chalmette Plain played a decisive role in shaping the engagement. The Mississippi River constrained movement on the west, while swamps and woods limited maneuvers on the east. The resulting corridor created a narrow front, along which the British would have to attack directly into fortified American positions. The Rodriguez Canal, though shallow, formed a very useful barrier once deepened and widened by American labor. Jackson's line behind the canal stretched approximately 1 mile. He concentrated artillery batteries at intervals along the line, providing overlapping fields of fire. The strongest positions were near the center, where regulars from the 7th and 44th U.S. Infantry were stationed. The British planned a frontal assault, supported by artillery and diversionary actions. Their strategy also included an attempt to cross the Mississippi and capture American batteries on the west bank, which could then fire upon Jackson's main line from behind. However, the execution of this plan depended on very precise coordination and successful movement of materials, including ladders and fascines needed for crossing the canals. Delays, miscommunications, and environmental obstacles interfered with all of these things. A quick side note, the term fascine is somewhat interesting. It indicates a bundle of sticks tied together, which are thrown into a ditch and allows you to cross them. These were used during World War I, and you often see pictures of the original tanks showing these big bundles of sticks, the fascines, on the back of the tanks. We actually had PVC pipe fascines during Desert Storm, and my first unit, we still had a few of these floating around in one of our storage yards. The term fascism originates from this same word, the fascine being a bundle of sticks with an axe in the middle, bound tightly by a leather strap. The whole idea of fascism was to invoke the fascine, where one stick by itself is weak, but many sticks bound together tightly, by the state one would assume, proved very strong, hence the origin of fascism. Anyways, side note over. The main British attack began in the early morning hours of January 8th. Dense fog initially obscured the battlefield, delaying British movements but also providing some cover. As the fog lifted, however, British troops advancing across open ground became exposed to American artillery and small arms fire. The British right column, commanded by General Gibbs, aimed to strike the American left, and the left column under General Keane moved towards the American right. A reserve under General Pakenham followed behind. The plan required the 44th Regiment to carry forward the necessary ladders and fascines to allow troops to pass the canal. However, due to confusion and miscommunication, the 44th Regiment failed to bring forward these essential materials in time. Don't forget nothing. This mistake forced attacking soldiers to attempt crossing the canal without the adequate support, slowed the advance, and exposing them to concentrated fire. American artillery inflicted heavy casualties on the British, including among officers who attempted to rally their troops. Pakenham himself was mortally wounded while leading efforts to restore momentum. General Gibbs received fatal injuries. With leadership collapsing and formations disrupted, the British assault faltered. Many soldiers sought shelter in the canal or retreated across the field. On the American right, the diversionary British attack across the river initially succeeded, as the small American forces on the West Bank retreated. However, this success came too late to influence the main battle, and the British command soon ordered withdrawal to avoid isolation. Within less than an hour, the main British attack had failed decisively. Casualty figures vary across sources, but British losses are estimated at over 2,000 killed, wounded, or captured, and American casualties numbered fewer than 100. The disparity reflects the strength of the American defensive position, the effectiveness of the artillery, and the difficulties inherent in the British assault, which, in retrospect, was arrogantly stupid. Following the failed assault, British forces maintained positions near the battlefield for several days, conducting minor skirmishes but unable to mount another major attack. They eventually withdrew to their ships and shifted operations toward Mobile Bay. However, the imminent arrival of the news of the Treaty of Ghent ended further conflict. From a strictly strategic perspective, the victory at New Orleans did not alter the territorial or diplomatic outcomes of the war, as peace terms had already been negotiated. The United States did not gain new territory as a result of the battle, nor did the battle influence the formal treaty. Nevertheless, the engagement had significant military implications. It demonstrated again the defensive potential of well-positioned American forces, enhanced the reputation of militia units, and provided a model for future U.S. coastal defenses. For Britain, the defeat was an embarrassment, but not a catastrophic strategic loss. Most British troops deployed to Louisiana were soon needed for other imperial duties. The greater long-term symbolism lay not in military consequence, but in public memory and political symbolism. After the massive casualties with 2 decades of Napoleonic-era conflicts, these scant losses comparatively at New Orleans were a footnote in European history. Although the Battle of New Orleans did not affect the treaty, it profoundly shaped American public perception of the war. News of the victory reached many Americans before they had learned the war had actually ended. As a result, the battle came to be viewed as an event that secured American independence a second time and proved the nation's capacity to defend itself against a major European power yet again. The victory also helped unify the country after a period of political division. The Hartford Convention, which had reflected New England Federalist opposition to the war, lost momentum, as the triumph at New Orleans bolstered national pride and discredited critics who had predicted disaster. The War of 1812 as a whole came to be remembered, albeit selectively, as a second war for independence, and the New Orleans victory became its most celebrated moment. Culturally, the battle became part of American mythology. Later popular accounts depicted the American defenders as overwhelmingly outnumbered citizen soldiers triumphing through ingenuity and courage. While the defenders indeed faced a larger and more experienced enemy force, the success depended more on the advantage of terrain, defensive engineering, British miscalculations, and the king of battle, artillery. Nonetheless, the symbolic power of the victory resonated quite strongly. The Battle of New Orleans played a central role in the political rise of Andrew Jackson. Prior to the battle, Jackson was known regionally as a frontier leader and military commander. After the victory, he became a national hero. His reputation for decisiveness and toughness was reinforced, even though many of his wartime actions raised constitutional questions. Jackson levered his fame into political capital. He served as the governor of Florida, then entered national politics, led to his presidential candidacies in 1824, which he lost, and then won decisively in 1828, becoming our 7th president. The political movement known as Jacksonian democracy, characterized by expanded participatory politics, had its roots partly in the celebrated memory of Jackson's New Orleans victory. The Battle of New Orleans occupies, obviously, a prominent place in U.S. historical memory, which is why I'm doing it. And commemorations began soon after the war. January 8th was celebrated for decades as a national holiday. The site of the battle became a national historic park. The battle has influenced popular culture, and there was a 1959 song, The Battle of New Orleans, which embedded certain narratives of the conflict into popular understanding, even if they were partially mythology. The Battle of New Orleans remains one of the most studied and commemorated events in early American military history, even though it had nothing to do with the actual peace of the War of 1812. The battle illustrates the complexity of warfare in the early 19th century, where geography, logistics, leadership, and communication could decisively influence outcomes. Finally, it reveals how military events can acquire meanings far beyond the immediate strategic consequences and shaped political careers and national narratives for generations. Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.